living with your adolescent canine. We will tonight be looking at that very sometimes stressful development stage with our puppies, well, actually our teenagers. And we're going to have a look at a huge range of subjects to help us try and get through this, this stage. So let's discuss tonight, when did this happen? Why did this happen? We will just dip into dominance. I'm sure that you've hung around with me, most of you, long enough to know that this isn't dominance, but I will have it in here and we'll just quickly touch on it. We'll look at the fearful stages a teenager can go through, the role of sexual hormones and their effect upon our teenagers, our role, don't paint yourself into the corner, us understanding how dogs think. We'll look into a bit of neutering. It's a very important part of this stage of your dog's life, whether we should or shouldn't. Relationship building, functional rewards, knowing your breed types. We will definitely dip into nutrition. We always should do. Do we nag? What happens about nagging? Then we'll have a little look about training and about keeping our teenager happy. Then there's quite a critical stage about socializing with our dogs. And we'll even quickly dip into a little bit about equipment. So when did this happen? Well, for all of us, it happened a bit too soon, didn't it? We had our cute little puppy, and then all of a sudden we didn't have our cute little puppy. Even when our cute little puppy was play biting, it probably sometimes pales into insignificance as what our teenagers can get up to. Certainly, we talk about as early as 18 weeks. We often look at the science and think from 16 weeks. It's certainly once all the adult teeth are in place by 20 to 24 weeks for sure. And then we're looking at the onset of sexual maturity, 7 to 9 months, when our hormones come into play, and our bitches are trying to come into season as early as 6 months, and sometimes even a little bit earlier. And we sort of know when our dogs, male dogs, are heading for some sort of sexual maturity because we can get leg cocking, of course, and they start to lift their legs when they're urinating. Yeah. Oh, someone's got a mic on somewhere. Why did this happen? Well, it's all part of growing up. So let's just bit like when we talk about play biting with our puppies, it's all part of the development stage. So it's part of growing up. The brain and the body are going through different stages. It's obviously linked to our sexual hormones that our puppies are experiencing. Our teenagers are starting to come into this breeding idea. For a male dog, their peak of testosterone can be around 8 months. And with our hormonal increase in the bitches, that's obviously to trigger a first season, to trigger the idea that Mother Nature wanted, which is to have a litter of pups. It isn't dominance, and I want you to make sure you keep away from this subject and you keep everybody in your family and friends away from this subject. Dominance is a myth for describing conflict between humans and canines, because being insecure, unsure, confused, untrained, and reacting to stuff is not dominance. That is a development stage. The untrained bit is our fault. Reacting to stuff is going to be based on the age of the dog and where its hormones are, where its brain developments are, whether it's going through a growth spurt. And repeating successful behavior is quite definitely not dominance. When your dog is repeatedly being successful at sitting for you, you don't see it as dominance. But when your dog is successfully running around the front room with your favorite slippers, why would we dip into that being dominant? So dogs only repeat successful behaviors. And if we allow them to create a memory for unwanted behaviors, it doesn't mean that they're dominant. It just means that they're repeating successful behaviors. So just remind ourselves, let alone the dominance myth, let's remind ourselves that actually we are the ones in control of all the resources. So our dogs are thoroughly aware of that. We do bring home the kill, we do bring home the food. Water is exceedingly important. We don't actually use it as a resource that we control generally in the household, but we have access to the water, we have access to the doors, the furniture, the games, the treats, the love, the attention. So, and that's what happens when you are the parent, the caregiver, the guardian. You are the one that's in control of resources, and your dogs are definitely aware of that. So that's what we should be acting like. We should be acting as the sort of, we don't want to go all soft and cuddly, but actually we should be acting as the mum and dad, and making the rules, helping the youngsters learn, and using our resources as well, very much to persuade our family to actually learn and cooperate. So what owners don't often understand with their young dogs, when they see things, particularly when they're going wrong, that your young dogs have very much life stages that they have to go through. Mother Nature, evolution, however you look at it, actually, just as we talk about play biting being a perfectly normal behavioral stage for a puppy, actually the next stages that your teenager goes through are perfectly normal behavioral development stages. Very often they're linked to the need, particularly originally in the wild, that your dog would need to go further afield. So I always say the same to owners, that in the wild, a pessimistic young animal is more likely to survive to be an adult than an optimistic young animal. And you can already, I'm sure here, once you hear it, you can actually understand why that's the case. So something that's pessimistic in the wild, something that's a little bit fearful, a little bit cautious, a little bit wary, will make it probably to the adult stage. So it's a perfectly normal thing for your dog to be fearful when it's actually going to have to extend how far it goes and what it encounters. There is only one very big problem with what we do with our teenager dogs. Owners will take their puppies, their teenagers, further and further out of their depth if you're not very careful. So will often overexpose the youngsters, and they will often take them out of their depth much further than they can go emotionally, and they will most often face them up to people and dogs. And how do we do this? Well, most of the time we've actually got our dogs on lead, haven't we? So your dogs are designed to go further afield as adolescents, and maybe even in the wild they would leave the pack. But also, if we're not careful as owners, simply by how we expose them and where we expose them, we'll take them out of their depth as well. So between 4 and 8 months of age, we have this sort of period when our teenagers can turn a deaf ear, and we'll have a little look at why that can be the case in a minute. And this period can last from a few days when you might not even notice, or before you've noticed it's moved away, or it can actually be quite a few weeks. Now, when your dog's going through this 4 to 8 month flight instinct period, you must try to praise the positive. And actually, you need to, with teenagers, as in with most mammal teenagers, particularly humans, you need to overemphasize the positive. You need to actually, you might feel as if you're being a little bit too nice, but because the way the brain operates, it's better to be more positive. And you want to minimize the negative behavior. So if you've got a teenager, I tend to take the view that the second I see it doing something that I don't like, I will stop it. I don't want it to bring that behavior into its little, what I call flashcard pack, and become a learned behavior. So you either need to have a teenager with that flight instinct period, you need to actually not allow it to actually learn new behaviors, or you need to be ready to teach it a different behavior. This period is also linked to a second chewing period. Very often by the time the dog is certainly 8 months of age, you might have put away the crate and you might have put away the chewing toys or bones or whatever you've used to try and teeth your puppy through. And actually the teeth are going to settle again into the jawline. And very often a young dog of 8 months, 6, 7, 8 months will start actually re-chewing on the furniture, on the bottom of the stairs, picking things up around the house and getting into serious problems. And this is a time when you can get a lot of behavioral problems around that sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 months of age, which is what some of us have already started to see, particularly when we talk about what we call COVID puppies. You have read that quite a few are coming into rescue now. And this is because this particular time is quite stressful for your dog. Then we have this secondary fear impact period, so 6 to 14 months. This can strike at any particular time. The most obvious thing I normally say to owners is that you've got your young dog and he's walked down the street 1,000 times maybe, and all of a sudden he's afraid of the post box. With a German Shepherd puppy who's gone into a teenager stage, teenager fear stage, this could be happening. And it seems very odd and very strange. And if you don't handle it very well, you will be creating more fear. So more fear would be not being understanding, not being patient, not being kind, forcing the dog to go closer to the thing that he's afraid of. In the wild, generally, things that a young dog is afraid of, the rest of the pack, if they agree, will move away from it. If the rest of the pack don't agree, they will tend to be indifferent to it. With humans, when they've got their dogs on lead and they're afraid of things, they've got their teenagers on lead and they're afraid of things, they tend to get very involved and tend to keep making the dog go towards the thing. If it's your post box, maybe it's not a serious problem to have. But obviously, if you're taking your dogs out of the depth towards other people and other dogs, you could be creating a serious problem because you are taking your dog towards a thing that he has a fear response to. The other thing, of course, is when we take our dogs, our young dogs out of the depth, is we're supposed to be trying to teach them to trust us. And if you're not generally helping your dog with the things that he's afraid of, you could be sort of damaging that relationship. Any dog, but particularly a young dog or a puppy, should be able to help, ask its owner for help. And different dogs have different ways of doing this. We generally like to have some eye contact between us and our young dogs for them to explain that they're feeling bad about something. The other thing is, of course, we can help our young dogs by asking them to come away from things they're afraid of. And that's very, very useful, of course. They're afraid of a child walking down the street. We could ask them to move away, let's go, come away, come here, whatever. But I very much so try to also encourage my young dogs to make the correct decisions. So that's allowing them to work things out so that they can build self-confidence. So the thing we're always talking about when we're doing our, particularly our reactive to reassured dog work, is that opting out is always a confidence giver and never a confidence breaker. So when you've got your young dogs in this fearful stage and you think you're recognizing it, or you sort of now, like today, have been told that it could possibly be there, you have definitely two ways which you should practice with your teenager. You should have good training going on, so you can call him away. You know he's off lead down the park and he sees a person he doesn't like. You need a good recall, but also to teach him that actually when he sees things he doesn't like, that he should be actually heading off in a different direction. Definitely heading off in a different direction, preferably your direction. So what about the effects of our sexual hormones? We'll just quickly look at our males. Obviously, we all recognize that our young male dogs will have testosterone. But I've put there straight away on the top there that this is a confidence giver. Do not let people making you think that testosterone is to do with aggression. So testosterone is about the dog being given confidence, particularly in humans. We look at the human science because it's easier to read. Testosterone leads to cooperative, fair, and reputation-seeking behavior. Testosterone is very much needed to help young male dogs in social groups and with status maintenance. And this is probably also one of the places where that testosterone is there for the particular reason to help a dog find its place in the pack. But actually, our young male dogs often don't have a pack. And it's not hard to realize that these days often our young male humans don't have the peers that they need to look up to. And testosterone is definitely for making sure the dogs can fit in well. With the sexual hormones, though, in the males, we also get the other things that come with it. And you can see there that we've got our brain fog, we've got our lack of self-control and fear. And we don't anthropomorphize, but actually mammals are mammals. And some of you actually who are out there who are actually equine people, it's the same when we're sitting on young male horses or young female horses. We actually have the same problems. So brain fog, I always used to use the, I've got a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. And I always used to say, when Ethan came home from school and he couldn't remember what he'd had for lunch, as a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old, when he said he couldn't remember, he wasn't being awkward. He wasn't trying to wind me up. He wasn't being naughty. He actually couldn't remember. So brain fog in young animals, particularly young males, is obviously, that's just a development stage. Lack of self-control, joy riders, equivalent to young male dogs running around the park at high speed, talking to everything, not being very polite, that sort of thing, lack of self-control. And then back to actually the sexual hormones are linked to being afraid of things as well. So they're coming along with those development stages. They're all interlinked, they're all intertwining and with each other. So just remember that sometimes the dog that you have in front of you, in terms of his brain, is not really all there. I mean, it's just that it's not developed properly, and it's going to have to go for that development over the next sort of year to 18 months before you can get back to the dog that you really want. And again, that's true of our young males as well. So sexual hormones in the female, exactly the same really. Brain fog, lack of self-control, and lack and increased fear. The brain relies significantly on proper hormone balance in females in order to function appropriately. So what happens when it's not functioning properly? We'll have a look in a second, but just try to remember that these hormones are really, really important, and that actually there can be more hormones in the brain than actually in the bloodstream, which is really quite important to remember because they're having a significant effect on how your dog's brain functions. So we know what our female hormones are for. So our estrogen is to help along with the reproductive system, and it's going to actually make sure there's some maturity in the reproductive organs by the time the dog gets puberty. With our progesterone, it's getting everything ready for the fertilized egg, and it's going to make sure the dog can stay pregnant and get those mammary glands working. This is where we definitely, with male and female dogs, definitely split off, because obviously female dogs will cycle. And male dogs tend to have this peak of testosterone, and then it'll disperse to a sort of level which is normal for your male, unless there's a few influencing factors, but normally it's generally in the males it'll level off. but your females are going to be cycling. And what happens when they're cycling is that progesterone will elevate and dissipate and whatever. And the side effects of progesterone for us are well known, but actually, if we look at it from a dog's point of view, there's still the possibility of anxiety, emotional ability, and irritability. So I have breeding bitches, and they can be a little bit grumpy a few weeks before I know they're going to come into season, and they can be grumpy a few weeks after they come out of season. So we do these days like to keep our animals entire, particularly our young ones, because we have the science to say that they shouldn't be neutered because of the hormones being linked to how the body develops. And we want good bone structure, and we want good anatomy, and we want good brains. So we neuter a lot later or not at all. But do be aware, if you've got a female, that you do be a bit more hot on the fact that if she is cycling and you know when it is, that you should be careful sometimes around that elevation. Now let's just look. We've got our dog. We know we've sort of looked at it hormonally. We know it's going through a development stage. We're going to look for fear, but let's put the onus obviously back onto ourselves. And very often what happens with the teenage dogs is that we do put too much onus onto the dog. And that's really not a good idea, because the dog is not trying to wind you up. When it refuses to comply, apart from the brain fog, maybe we haven't done enough training, or maybe we think we've done lots of training, but we haven't realized that we haven't quite done the training correctly. So I'm not being rude when I say, come on, you have the IQ for this, because within that household, your dog is going to have the IQ of a 2-year-old by the time it's 2. So you really got the IQ for sorting this out. So when we say don't paint yourself into a corner, and I can think of a couple of times when I've done this myself over the years, I want you to actually, let's say the dog's gone under a table or bed with some tissue, not unusual for a dog for sure. Don't be getting down on your hands and knees, don't be getting under there, try and get it back. You just need to do your sass, and you need to stop. If it's not life-threatening, particularly say in that scenario of the dog's gone under the table, I would walk away. If it's not of any danger to the dog, I would definitely walk away. Then you want to stop. You want an action plan. So the action plan for the tissues may be that you don't give the dog access to tissues, but that's probably, he might raid your pockets, or you might have some around the house, but you might want to actually start to make sure the dog's got a good swap or drop. But certainly stop, think of what you're going to do next, and then start again. Start again, either training, or start again to approach the dog in a better mood, or start again to approach the dog with some more incentives, like you've gone into the kitchen, you've gone and got some cheese or some sausage. So have a little think. Never go into too quick on a teenager, because that brain fog and that fear and that irritability, those are all the sort of things that if you're not careful, you're going to both get yourselves into a lot of trouble. I was talking via Facebook to someone recently whose husband had been bitten by the Malinois, who had found an in-season bitch down the park. And it was a young Malinois, and it found an in-season bitch, and the owner had gone in and tried to take it away, and the husband had got bitten. Now, the wife was all for we should neuter the dog. And luckily myself and one or two people said, it's nothing to do with the bitch being in season. It's to do with the dog being over-roused and actually going in too quick. So that could have been your teenager's gone and cornered a cat for the first time, and you go in too quick and you try to control the dog and get bitten. So stop, action plan, start again. With all your dogs, always, but certainly with your youngsters, because their brains aren't really working that well anyway. So if you try to corner them mentally or physically, you could get yourself into a little bit of bother. And of course, what happens when you get yourself into bother is you and the dog both remember, and then the relationship is slightly tarnished, which again is not what we want at all. So just to remind ourselves, lots of you who've hung out with me will know, because I'm always repeating this sort of thing over and over again. As I just mentioned, your dog has not got a very good high IQ, very high IQ. It's perfectly good IQ for what he needs to do in his life. He's a good problem solver. He's attentive to what you're doing. He's checking on things, and he's working things out and watching what you're doing with your hands, and he'll copy you, but he hasn't got a very high IQ. There's no words in his head. He's a visual thinker. We're more verbal thinkers, but he has to see things and he has to connect with them, a behavior. He doesn't have any imagination. Yes, when he's fast asleep, he could possibly be dreaming of rabbits, but actually when he's there right in front of you, he's not planning world domination. He's not planning anything ahead, because he can't really do that. He's going to operate on what he remembers happened in the past, or he'll just make something up on the spot, usually based on either being a dog or based on his breed type. Your dog only offers a behavior which you think is appropriate at the time. So if the dog has just stolen your bacon butty off the side there, his brain told him that was an appropriate thing to do. He, as a teenager particularly, didn't think it was naughty. He doesn't know it's naughty. He will look guilty if you tell him off, because he will go into appeasement mode. But he only offers behavior which he thinks is appropriate at the time. So you can't really be upset at anything your dog does truthfully, because the dog is always right. His little computer side of his brain, his little memory store, told him to do what he just did. And dogs only repeat successful behaviors. Everything your dog does has got a tick next to it. So it's either got a little tick or a big tick, but it's only successful behaviors. And of course, the last memory is the strongest memory. So that is what makes us as dog trainers look so brilliant in class. Because if we can get our dog to be in the right position at the right time and we can reward him, the next time he'll offer that position quicker. So last memory is the strongest memory, which is actually what probably brings me back to the fact that with a teenager particularly, I'll stop him doing anything I don't like immediately. Because if he manages to do something for a few seconds and then he can put a tick next to it, he actually is going to remember that as a sort of, learned behavior. So the big question, we've had a little look at the hormones, and very often when teenagers are out of control, there will be various people, even your own vet, saying, well, you best neuter him. That would be neutering him because you think he's getting aggressive in some way, down the park with other dogs. Maybe he's being too full on, or maybe he's being too excitable, he's using your furniture as a bit of a racetrack around the house and that sort of thing. So people begin to wonder if neutering will help. The other thing is to think about whether desexing your dog actually stands alone as procedure, or whether actually it affects other things, because very often one of the main reasons owners might neuter a dog is because they don't want puppies, or they don't want the dog to wander off to go make puppies. So that could be the only reason they're thinking. They might not be worried about aggression, and they might not be worried about the dog being so excitable, but they're actually thinking about reproduction. So, but we have to admit, what I'm going to say straight away, that desexing your dog does not stand alone as a procedure. We have for many years advised not to neuter your dogs, particularly at an early age, at that very early age, at that teenager age. And luckily, recently, we've had some very successful studies done, and some very big studies done. And this is one of the best ones that we've got to hand, where they brought together two studies which created a cohort of 16,000 dogs to look at. And we can't really argue with that, because that's a huge database to use to figure out how dogs feel about being neutered. So given that the idea that spaying or neutering was generally considered to be a way of reducing aggression, the results of these studies show that not only will your dogs likely get more aggressive if they're neutered, but considerably more aggression involved in neutered dogs. It does depend on the type of aggression. There's lots of different types: owner-directed, stranger-directed, other dogs, children. Just there's lots of aggression things that dogs can be aggressive about. But actually, it ranged from about a 20% increase to more than double the level of aggression in neutered dogs. So if you had one entire male who was being aggressive for a particular reason, in some cases you would then have two neutered dogs who were being actually aggressive for the same reason. A bit of a surprise was that both males and females were showing this increased aggression. It wasn't gender specific. The only difference was that the females seemed to be more affected by neutering if they were neutered early. So that study definitely pointed towards, if you were going to neuter, do not neuter early, but definitely don't neuter your females early. And most worrying about the study about neutering was that the neutered dogs were more likely to show aggression in all the sort of things which your dog should be encountering every day. Delivery workers, joggers, cyclists. If a male dog was approached by an unfamiliar female dog, unfamiliar people, people who visited the home, animals in the garden. And the earlier you neutered, the worse. So that description of finding all those things that the dog was aggressive towards were generally everything the dog probably had to encounter on a daily basis. And not only that, but neutered dogs also showed more fear-related behaviors. So the neutered dogs were more likely to respond to loud noises, were to be worried about children, didn't like being barked at or growled at. They weren't happy about meeting other dogs. And also they were more upset about being examined and handled. And again, once again, the younger the dog was neutered, the worse the aggression was. Now, finally, the thing about this study was, which we hadn't realized before, was also the dogs that were neutered were actually more likely to be touch sensitive. So you think about putting a harness on, you think about handling, you think about toweling the dog down, you think about putting maybe a raincoat on him. 33% of these dogs, neutered dogs, were more touch sensitive. And they actually, around roughly about 8% of them seemed to show they got more excitable by being neutered. The only thing that neutering does seem to solve is, based on this study, was that 70% showed a decrease in urine marking. So there's that possibility. And also we talk about another study where a little bit of neutering can help resource guarding. So I'm just going into that to depth because I want you to have the ammunition to be able to say to whether it's your vet professionals or whether it's your family members that no, neutering is not really a good idea. So when we say on these sort of studies too early, I would definitely say you should wait till about 14 months, is probably the earliest. And if you can go a little bit further, that would be good too. You would make sure you don't neuter too early anyway, because your sexual hormones are linked to your dog's growth spurts, and you want to make sure he's fully grown before you actually neuter him. So we just looked at the neutering our dogs early, and that is very much down to yourselves. You're in control of that. The other big area you are very, very, very much the leader in is that relationship building. It's certainly your responsibility to actually have the teenager wanting to actually hang out with you, listen to you, enjoy being with you. That's your job. That's your job completely. You do hold resources. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. So you have got the keys to the cupboard where the food's kept. He can't open the doors very well without you, though obviously a few dogs are quite good about opening their doors. You have the brains. If you're lacking the skills, go find them, which is why you're all here tonight. Maybe you've come to find the skills if need be. But there's other places you can come to me. You can, find some decent books or videos or whatever. But find the skills necessary. I do wish sometimes I'd had a little bit more skill set for my young teenagers, humans. But there we go. Hey, what can we do about that? Most importantly, with a teenager, you've got to be fair, consistent, and clear. And when we say be fair, consistent, and clear, it seems easy enough, but I want you to make sure as well that you look around the family and see if everybody's playing by the same rules. I'm not being funny, but often, the male and the female of the family could be actually training in a different way, or the children could be wasting a word, a wait or a stay or a come. So when we say be fair, consistent, clear, if there's any ambiguity, I would actually have, when we do puppy-proof sessions, we talk about a family plan. I would make sure that everybody in the family knows what the dog is allowed, what he's not allowed, what he's allowed to do, what the commands are, and that sort of thing. And then most of all, be rewarding to your dog. That's the way he's motivated to learn. That's how he's going to lock down the correct memories. And when we say rewarding, I'm not just meaning that you give him a piece of sausage. Rewarding could be that if he gives you eye contact, you let him out through the door. If he gives you, certainly for me, if he gives me eye contact, I'll let him out the car. It could be a scratch. It could be a pet pat. It could be praise. For some of us, I've got German Shepherds, haven't I? And they love doing stuff for praise. Yes, they like food, but they certainly love doing stuff for praise. Those of you who've got dogs from working lines, obviously praise is really important, and making the dog successful. The dog being successful is a rewarding thing as well. We might have a collie, puppy, or dog come into class, and of course we're using some treats to get him to do stuff. But if he's from working lines, when he was being taught, his parents were being taught to chase sheep, control sheep, to herd sheep, there was no sausages involved. So he was rewarded simply by the fact of what he was doing. So make sure your dog enjoys what he's doing with all sorts of rewards. So talking about just the collie there, obviously up on the hills of here in Wales, he's not got a sausage for bringing the sheep home. You must look at your dog's what we call functional rewards. So you must look at your dog's breed type. You must definitely look at your teenager's breed types, because he will be dipping into them. He might have brain fog, but the thing that he was designed to do will call to him. So you need to recognize your dog's physical, mental, and emotional needs if you want to get through this period, and if you want to make your dog happy really for the rest of his life. Now, collies do like to control things. I'm sure we've got a selection of breeds out there tonight, but retrievers do pick things up. Terriers do dig. My own German Shepherds do bark, and Spaniels obviously sometimes can't stop. Do remember some breeds, and Spaniels, the most obvious, are designed to keep going until somebody picks them up and throws them in the back of the Land Rover, or throws them in the kennel in a nice way, and they have to switch off. So I call that firmware. So what your dog was designed to do. Owners are very surprised to find that, to be made aware of the fact that If you've got a collie, oh, he's got a black and white spot, no, he's got a white spot on his nose, just like his dad. But actually, if he's come from a working farm, oh my goodness, he likes to chase cars. Everything's been passed down. So watch out for what your dog wants to do, and know your breed, and then use those rewards to actually reward your dog as well. So if your collie wants a reward, I would hold him back for a second, whether physically or you've trained him to sit back for a second and wait, and then release him to run all the way down the park before he heads back. Because he's going to head back because he'll imagine in his head somewhere that he's got his sheep and he's coming back. If I want my retriever to be happy, I'm not going to get into conflict with him over picking up things around the house. I'm just going to teach him to always bring them to me. I've got a terrier who wants to start digging up the flower beds. I'm going to give him probably a sand pit outside and then some boxes with things in to dive into inside. So definitely know what your breed's functional purpose was, and make sure you're not bringing yourself up against it. Obviously, for most of us, functional rewards or functional firmware or not, scent work is obviously fantastic for all our dogs, to actually give them a job to do. What do we say? Don't let your dog go self-employed. You want him to be a subby. You want to be a subcontractor. And using his breed type to your favor is obviously one of the ways of getting him to be a really happy subcontractor. One of the other aspects we have to really look at, and we would look at this with our children and ourselves, and definitely for sure, we definitely want to look at nutrition and its effects. There's a lot of dogs out there who are getting into serious trouble with their owners, and yes, there's some teenager things going on, but also poor diet will actually also create a teenager you don't want. Now, we can think of poor diet, we should think of poor diet in terms of itchy skin, flatulence, bad breath, big smelly motions. Okay, that's the sort of thing we don't like from our dogs, and we would normally go, oh, do you know what? I think I might change his diet. But there's other reasons to change your dog's diet. If he likes to, what we call self-medicate, if he wants to eat unusual things, sometimes that's a pointer to his gut isn't feeling so good. You shouldn't have more poos than you have meals. But also we can have temper tantrums based on poor nutrition. And that's an anxiety thing. That could be a sugar level thing. Mouthing and hyperactivity could be the same, the sort of stress, and then the inability to settle, the difficulty concentrating. Of course, we've got our brain fog again, but that can be nutrition, and getting easily overexcited. So you really do want your teenagers for sure on a really good diet. And again, dipping into my own teenagers, I like to try and make sure they get fed properly, that they get enough water, and it's not mentioned here, but obviously enough sleep. Okay, let's make sure that's there as well. I'm going to do a webinar in a couple of weeks' time on nutrition, because you might or might not know, but the dog world and nutrition is one of the most dubious, dodgiest areas of practically, I wouldn't say anything on the planet, but certainly it's just ridiculously bad. I think a lot of us for years now have been taken for a ride by various large manufacturers, and they've just used pretty pictures and pretty words and very cheap ingredients to make themselves very rich, to be honest. So we need to educate ourselves. And I said I'm going to do a webinar in a couple of weeks' time, but the basics would be always to read the labels. It's worth pointing out, I'm sitting here in the Awesome Pet Shop. And one of the reasons I've got a pet shop is because doing my reactive to reassured work, I realized that nutrition was one of the things which was being a problem. And one example of the foods I sell here is called Eden, and some of you might use it and some of you might know it. And And the one thing I love about Eden particularly is right on the front of the bags in really big letters is the ingredients. And if you go and look at your bag of food maybe a bit later on, if it's really quite small around the back in really tiny letters, it's there. It's like that for a reason, because there's some very dubious things in your dog's food. So always read your labels, even if you have to get a magnifying glass out. And you really want the top 3 ingredients to be quality proteins that you recognize. You really do want to be feeding your dogs things that you recognize. People often say, oh, dogs shouldn't have human food. Well, I'm afraid it's the other way around. Everything that's in your dog food should be human grade. And actually, the more human and the more recognizable it is, the better quality it is, to be honest. You want to avoid derivatives of animals or vegetables. It's worth saying that something like Pedigree, I can't believe are so successful because the only thing they put on their ingredient labels are derivatives of animals or vegetable. So they don't even tell you what's in it, and, it's a market leader. So you want to avoid that sort of thing. You want to avoid filling your dog with carbs he wouldn't normally touch. Obviously, maize and wheat are the sort of things I feed my chickens, and I've no intention of feeding them to my dog. And then it says there, it's all about a healthy gut. And it definitely is. The research is pretty clear now that if your dog hasn't got a healthy gut, there's a possibility he hasn't got a healthy brain. And we don't need to go, we haven't got time to go into great detail, but actually that is the absolute truth. There's a huge nerve leading from your dog's gut to the brain, and same for you and me, the vagus nerve. And there's a huge connection between how the gut is feeling and the decisions you all made. And there's a little note there about a very small but very telling survey that was done looking at the gut microbiome and finding that aggression. So if your dog hasn't got that healthy gut flora, if it's, maybe it's as a puppy, you've still got it on the same food and it's never tasted anything else in its whole life, you're unlikely to have a very lively, a very good gut flora, and that's probably not helping your dog in terms of being able to operate. In your teenager's time, and then maybe once again in your older dog's time, having some extra help is not a problem. So you can get calming supplements. I have just actually, I'm experimenting with a Nick Thompson idea of something called BioCare NT Intensive, which is for the nervous system. And Jasmine's a bit hormonal and Evie's very young and bouncy. And I've actually started feeding that this week because I'm going to see how that gets along on the recommendation of the holistic vet, Nick Thompson. But there's other things you can, you've got Eucalms and cyclines and things. There are things, if you think you need to, you can actually try to help your dog. A lack of magnesium will make for a very nervous dog. So the Zycline actually is magnesium based. So you might think about adding some supplements. We're very much into botanicals. Your dogs are very good about self-selecting. Jasmine, when she went through a particular stage about being worried about wind, I got her through that with one of the supplements being botanicals being German chamomile, and she absolutely adored it. And believe me, she actually was always asking for it when she was worried. So herbs, botanicals. You can have the pet remedies or the Adaptil plugins. I always run a pet remedy in the house. So there are other ways of bringing down that emotional threshold. So your dog is being very teenage-like, and you can recognize when things are going rather pear-shaped, because particularly if you can hear yourself repeating your dog's name and commands, okay? So if you find yourself nagging your dog and you've said his name, he's not looking at you, and then you're asking to do something and it's not happening, we would call that nagging. It tends to that nagging will float over your dog's head. And one of the reasons it will float over his head is because of the brain fog, is because of the, all the other things we've been talking about. But also, if you're not careful, as your dog drifts into being a teenager, when you would have just maybe tried to teach your dog to do something on one command, and if you're in puppy school, you would have been keeping his name topped up. Now maybe you're not doing that anymore. So rather than blaming the dog again when you find yourself nagging, you are going to have to go straight back to yourself and say, I've got to do some more training. This is lapsed. I need to do something about this. Because is the dog often not responding? Now, it's just memories. You need some training strategies and forward planning. You need to be actually thinking about the second it happens, really, the second it happens. You say dog's name, doesn't look at you. Oops, because in sense, that could be an emergency. He could be about to step onto some glass. He could be about to step onto the road. He could be about to bump into a child or another dog. So make sure that nagging is not seen as being the dog's fault, but actually it's seen as being you need to do some more training. And then, of course, we've just been through it all, allowing for the fact that he's a teenager. So maybe it is a teenager thing, the brain fog, he's not looking at you and say the name, but you best go and top it up so that you've got some chance of getting it right with him. Remember, it's a sound, sight, smell, memory, movement. Everything your puppy does, dog does, is generally a muscle movement. It's a muscle memory, and it's your job to keep all these topped up. A recall is just him moving his legs towards you. You saying his name is just a head tilt at you. You saying go for a wee is just his bladder opening, that sort of things. You might find yourself nagging as well, and it's worth mentioning because sometimes your dog might find it physically difficult to do what you're asking. So it says there anatomy issues. Sometimes maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 months of age, you might lose your sit with a young dog because of the way his bones are developing and his muscles and ligaments. So sometimes when you find yourself nagging, we'd understand it more in an old dog you found yourself nagging than you realized he was going deaf. But do remind yourselves that sometimes your youngsters lose coordination, and actually, just like humans, they can have a lot of growth, not problems, but issues that impinge on what they can do for you. Another example with an anatomy issue might be that your dog suddenly won't, your young dog won't suddenly jump in the back of the car. So maybe we've got a fear stage going on, plus we've got some sort of growth spurt, anatomy issue going on as well. And if not careful, if you're not in the right frame of mind, again, you'll blame the dog. And I tend to, the second I see anything like that, I tend to do the stop action plan, start again. I start to assess immediately, well, my dog jumped in the car yesterday. Why won't my young dog jump in the car today? So training, whether your dog's going through a really brain fog period or not, training is obviously teaching your dogs to automatically, without much question, do a certain thing when they hear a certain sound. So it's really important to get your dogs trained. But with a teenager, it's really important to include that relationship building, to have them, as I said, wanting to hang out with you, wanting to see what you're up to. Evie's very much at that stage most of the time. I think she's at her most engagement with me when she wants me to take her out through the front door. So she's really like there bouncing around and looking at me and running to the door and whatever. But she's trusting me that I'm going to take her out. She can get a little bit distracted out and about, of course. But relationship building is being fair, consistent, and clear, and being rewarding. Engagement is about the dog wanting to hang out with you, to wanting to engage with you, and you wanting to engage him. I've just put there as well, which is probably one of the hardest things to sometimes do with youngsters, is settling. So trying to train your puppies, the teenagers, to have an off switch, which again they find sometimes very difficult. We're back to your hormones, we're back to nutrition, we're back to brain fog, but actually settling. And little reminder at the bottom from Sarah Whitehead, who I very much trust and follow. Remember, what fuels the unwanted behavior is often the conflict itself. So avoiding the battle is far more important than winning it. Takes us back a little bit to our dog under the chair or table with the tissue. But avoiding the battle is far more important than winning it. So you could either walk away, or, as I said, avoiding the battle is getting that training in. So there's going to be no battle. The unwanted behavior of chasing the dog around for shoes and slippers has turned to the dog looking at you when he's got a slipper and saying, I'm going to bring it to you because this is a really rewarding thing to do. So what sort of things do we need of our teenagers more than anything else? I like to teach a stay for self-control. I like to teach a down stay for self-control, actually. So that's where the dog learns that by staying put, something really rewarding will come to it. It's one of our main things in our Canine Essentials course. Definitely a settle. We can use a little compulsion sometimes on the settle. Do remember with your teenagers that you can use a little bit compulsion. Compulsion to settle would be putting your foot on the lead, wouldn't it? But of course, we can use treats to reward the dog for being in the down. Leave it is probably a really important exercise for a young dog. They have a lot, you know, if we go back to our original screens about hormones, they have this lack of self-control. So leave it means do not take one more inch forward towards that thing, because I'll reward you with something similar or better. Interactive play. Very often we haven't done much about exercise in this up till now, but sometimes people think that with a teenager, the best thing to do is take it down the park and actually throw a ball up and down the park for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. That is just going to make for a fit dog and just make for a dog who's full of adrenaline and over aroused and actually won't be able to come down from a high. Interactive play is actually usually for us will be a tuggy toy and teaching the dog to get really aroused, to calm himself down really quickly so he can play again. Teaching a young dog how to get aroused and how to get out of being aroused is a really important thing as well. Evie herself has got that down to quite a fine art, really. So she's playing, she's tugging. I say dead. Maybe a split second later or 2 seconds later, she lets go and then we start again. So on to resource control is obviously important for the dog to see you've got resource control, but don't be a bully. So that would be, again, me. If we just use me example, it's always best. So I don't go to the door with Evie and start shouting, sit, 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 if she just go out for a wee, okay? Because that's just going to make me look like a bully. But I will go to the door and I'll wait till she offers me something nice before I open the door. She does tend to sit. I haven't trained her to sit, but she offers something like a pause. And so resource control is quite a good way of teaching your dog, because it does get it into their heads that actually you are quite an important person in their life. Don't forget your most important things when you're doing your focus exercises. Your dog should look at you when you say its name. We have our ready command, which again means the dog whips around and looks at us. We like to have a 1, 2, 3 in class, so we can actually keep the dog's concentration onto us. We start off saying 1, 2, 3 quite quickly and throwing a piece of food for the dog to catch, but actually we can slow it right down. Find my space. Saying to the dog, you know, it's not good to worship my hands. You should be actually making eye contact. Touch, which is a very easy way for your dog to actually come back under control. He'll come and touch your hand and get a treat. And a get it, as in that sort of together, chase down a piece of food, chase down a toy sort of thing. If you need some help, if you've been through puppy school, go back to your puppy school manual. If you've done the canines, or if you're going to perhaps join us for some courses, we've got a nice manual. There's a few other books there, which I would recommend that you get, and they will help you out and about your dogs, okay? So you're going to get the copy of this. So definitely start reading up if you need to, and get some more training skills in. Don't forget that if you have a problem with your teenager, you don't have to feed it out of a bowl. You can carry your dog's ration. So if you've got very bad recall going on for whatever reason, because you haven't trained it enough, or you're not training off distractions, or you've ruined it, or something, how it's getting ruined, carry your dog's food around with you everywhere. If you want to get him more occupied rather than just inhaling his food, then obviously use the licky mats and the licky bowls and the stuffed Kongs, frozen food, treats. Make sure his food's coming from various things. We have got a Facebook and canine enrichment group with loads of help in there. So there's loads of videos and information in there about how to use canine enrichment. Definitely think about doing some scent work for sure. Scent work is obviously one of the easiest ways to wear your dog out. 20 minutes of mental exercise is equivalent to an hour's physical. Sniffy walks, decompression walks. So going slow. I'm quite happy to stand and wait 20, 30 seconds for my dogs to finish sniffing a particular plant, a particular pot, and a particular post. I like to get engaged with them. I'll ask them what they're up to. Just going slow, doesn't matter. It's just about quality over quantity. And for goodness sake, don't think you can wear a teenager out. I think 21 miles is about the most we think a dog can go in a day. So it's no good trying to wear him out physically, throwing a ball up and down the field. You're just going to make an over-aroused dog, and you're just going to probably wreck your dog anyway. Right, just getting towards the end now. Being with other dogs. So being with other dogs can be very tricky. Your teenagers can get to be annoying. They often don't read situations very well, and they lack that self-control. So they're going in to talk to other dogs, maybe in a fear stage, or maybe in a lack of control mood. They might be in a brain fog mood. They might be told off. Telling off from a few other dogs in a reasonable way isn't a huge problem. So your young dog goes in on, some small older Jack Russell down the park and gets a right telling off. That's not a huge problem, but you don't want it to happen very often, okay? So again, if your teenager looks like he's going to continually be annoying, then you need to get him on a long line so he can't do it. And you probably need to find a few older dogs that he can go out with who are pretty boring. And again, he goes back to sniffing and whatever. Do remember your dogs repeat successful behaviors, and do remember that the last memories are stronger. So if you go down the park one day and they annoy a dog and they find some success in making the dog react, whether it's badly or in a nice way, they're going to remember the following day. So one positive versus repeated failures. You want to make sure your dog is successful, and successful for me with a young dog is not thinking that every other dog down the park is a plaything, but thinking that when I see a dog, I need to go slow. I need to check out what the other dog is thinking, what he wants to do. And if he doesn't want me, I need to learn to walk away. If your dog is, and your teenager is almost certainly going to be in a bit of a fragile confidence, you and me as older people can probably have an accident in the car and recover quite quickly. But maybe for a youngster, if they have an accident, they might not want to drive again for months. So your dogs have got very fragile confidence, and your job is to protect it. It really is protected. Doggy friends are good, but not continuous play dates. Balance is the key. Just mention that. Find your teenager a few friends, and those friends can do different things. You could have a similar breed, a similar age, and they like to have a good play, a good run. And then you might have another doggy friend who your teenager learns that we just go for a little stroll, or we go around to my mum's and I don't interact with her chihuahua at all because he doesn't want to. Okay, so doggy friends are good, but they don't always have to be play dates. I've just put here identify best equipment. Why? Because some of you might have saw on my Facebook this week. I do believe that you should have your youngsters under control, and I do believe you should, what I call, actually have a bit of a toggle on them. So you know, if you were going to teach your children to swim, you'd have armbands. If you were going to teach the children to ride bikes, you'd have stabilizers. I do think you should have the right equipment on, because you don't want the mistake, your dog making a mistake and then him remembering to do that again and again and again. A good quality a best equipment for me is a good quality harness. I've usually got Evie in her Perfect Fit 2-point harness with the front clip. I have got a good long line, and it says there, practice and not complaining. I am going to go out and practice and make sure I'm safe and in control. That is the best way to go forward with teenager, for sure. Your teenager, I see it again and again. Facebook generally is full, particularly of my own breed, of young German Shepherds going forward and scaring other dogs. And then, of course, they just scare themselves. That's what happens, isn't it? They just scare themselves, and then it becomes an issue. So do have a little think. I'm going to do a long line article soon, and recommend some of the long lines that I use, and also how to use them. Just one immediate safety thing: don't use your long line around lots of people and lots of other dogs. I do know how you feel. There's my Evie.
You really don't know how I feel right now.
There's my Evie. She is the most excitable, most energetic shepherd I've ever had in my whole life. She is a COVID canine, so she certainly did suffer during the middle of last year from lack of socialization with people and things. She's miles better, but we've still got a little way to go. Yeah, that's my youngster. So just before we go into questions, just to leave this up here for a second, I'm going to be doing some teenager training. We are obviously not out face-to-face, but I am going to be offering 3 weeks of set homework for anybody who wants to join in and train their teenager. That will include, say, 3 weeks of set homework, some weekly Zoom training class with some Q&A sessions, and I'm going to give you a training hub, online training hub, for you to be able to dip in and out of and see exercises and videos and links and whatever. And I want it to be focused and motivational for you, which, if it's focused and motivational for you, should be focused and motivational for your dog. It will include those things that I mentioned earlier in the slides, but of course we also need things like walking on lead, and particularly of our youngsters, recall training, don't we? That's where we tend to lose, that's where brain fog generally gets us out on our out and about stuff. If you're interested in doing some teenager training, just email Janet on the info@bcthoughts.co email address, and just say teenager training, and she will forward you the information. Or of course you can message us on the Beastly Thoughts Facebook page. Right, bit over, but we started a bit late. So I'm going to stop my share, and you're all still here. Wow, okay. And let's go and see what's been happening in the chat. I could see sometimes as the chat was building up. So I can get into my chat. Oh yes. There's Amy been keeping an eye on the chat. Bum, bum, bum. What have you been saying? Right, if you've got any questions, why don't you pop them into the chat, and I'm just going to run down the chat and see what's been going on. Okay, so Joe's got, how do you deal with Dachshund's functional compulsion to bark at everything and anything to positive effect? If you're not aware, one of the good, we have to watch out with your terriers and your Dachshunds. You do generally have to watch out for anything which is meant to go down a hole, because it's very useful to have a loud bark if you go down a hole. Because if you get stuck down a hole, you can obviously be found quite easily. So hound dogs that go down holes, you know, dachshunds or terriers. So have we got, it's Joe, isn't it? Have we got to the point Sometimes you might get to the point where you might have to teach Dashan to bark on command and then ask it to stop on command if it's really got out of control. But just try to remind yourselves again and again and again that dogs only repeat successful behaviors. I'll tell you what I quickly do on my consultations. Let's just do this for everybody here. So we tend to talk about A, B's and C's, okay? So B stands for your behavior. A is what we call your antecedent, which is a big word, but it happens to make A, B, C work, okay? But antecedent is the trigger, the cue. So a sit is an antecedent. The trigger, seeing a rabbit might be an antecedent. B is the behavior. C is the consequence. C is the reward. C is the craving, okay? A, B, and C, okay? Now, often owners get stuck on B's. And what do we say? Don't get bogged down in the B's, work on the A's and C's, okay? So what I say to owners is to get a piece of paper out and write down all the unwanted behaviors you don't want. So big piece of behavior, big piece of paper, but down the middle, write down the B's and put B at the top and write down the behaviors you don't want. Then I want you to write either side the A's and the C's, okay? So the A could be pretty obvious. Somebody walks past the door, the front of the house, my dog barks, that's the behavior. And what's the consequence? Well, the consequence is, it could be often depends on the breed type, but for German Shepherd, it's self-rewarding. But for most dogs, they bark and the person goes away. So there's safety. So there's a C, isn't there? To work on your B's, you either need to get rid of the A's if there's no trigger, if there's no antecedent, if there's nothing to make the memory come up, there won't be any B, okay? The other thing to do is to make sure the reward isn't there. So remember, with a dog, a reward could be when he barks that you tell him off. When he barks, you look at him. When he barks, you jump, okay? So you don't have to go into rewards being, oh, I don't give him a piece of sausage when he barks. So just your A's, your B's, and your C's is what I would always try to. And if you struggle on to see what the C is, just ask us, because sometimes the C's are a little bit more deeper. The C could be, of course, the C could have, which is when it gets slightly tricky, disappeared in a way. And so there might be a feeling of safety, or there might be a feeling of reward. Joe, further down the chat, if you want to write down your B's, so that would the behavior is barking, but obviously he's barking at me, he's barking out the window, he's barked, after this, or he's barked before, and I've done that. So if you want to be a little bit more specific about your barking. Same situation, my collie, but she's fine if I get to go to the thing, but not if we have to walk away. Well, I would teach her to walk away. Yeah. So a really good question from Chris. So sometimes when dogs are afraid of things, the way to do is to go forward and touch them. It's a good idea. And I do that, but you know what? Particularly the German Shepherds, I walk away first. So I would make the dog go away from the thing he's afraid of. And then if I thought it was a good idea for him to come back, then I would. I'll give you a good example. A few months ago, Evie was up on Trevanian playing fields, and they've got this big metal statue of a coal miner, because of the coal mining there. And she was afraid of it, and she was barking at it from about 15 feet, 20 feet. I made her go away first. She's on a long line, it's easy enough. I just took her away. Then while she was at a distance, I went up and touched it. And then she did the old creepy up to it sort of thing and went, oh, it's metal. It's not real. And you don't want your dog to think the way to get over being afraid of things is to go see them. So because they're likely to make a mistake when they get there, or the thing that they're afraid of doesn't want to see them. So maybe they're barking at a child. You don't want to be taking your dog up to a child to say, look, the child's all right. It's not good for the child, and it's not a good idea. I would always teach my teenage dogs, first of all, to move away from stuff. I seriously would. Move away, and that's almost for the dog, isn't it? That's your SAS, that's your stop, action, plan, start again. So move away, have a little think, and then let's go back and see if we can get you to have a positive experience. Remember, we've also got our Sherpa, which is our socialization, habituation, expose, reward, pause, assess, and that's a bit like SAS. So that means, again, with things that are spooky, things the dogs aren't good about, take a few feet back, see if the dog can manage there. If you can't, go a few more feet back, see if you can get into lockdown. It's not as bad as he thought, and then reward him for having the right emotional state. Bum, bum, bum. Just trying to move my cursor. Oh, thank you, Amy. You've been going. Okay, so, I'm about to touch the screen then. My last laptop was a touch screen. So Paul says we have an 8-month-old Sprock who's getting poor on recall. Very good in the garden, confined area, but not so much in open field. Doing a good recall 2 or 3 times and running off an uncomfortable distance. Always comes back on her terms when we concern becoming a learned behavior. We are getting the reluctant to let her off lead. Okay, so lots of things going on there. So what can we do? The gentleman says, very good in the garden. So first of all, I would do is I'd make it harder in the garden. So I'd add more distractions in the garden. That's one of the things I'd definitely do. So we do it in public school, don't we? I would make sure I could run the dog off things. So if someone's in the garden, we've got a spaniel who runs off, maybe sometimes. Well, can you call her off maybe if you've got a child playing football down one in the garden? Now, if you can't, then you have to see if you can call her off a child standing in the garden. Or owners often on recall workshops tell me they can't call their dogs off other dogs. And then when you ask them, well, can you call the dog off someone eating the biscuit in the house? And the answer is no. So if you've got anyway you've got a good recall, try to add some distractions. So if you've got a good recall for your teenager running from the front room to the kitchen, which is I always find my recalls are better into the kitchen, have somebody standing there with a biscuit they have to run past. And remember as well, again, good old training, you want your dog to come back on one command. And don't teach your dogs that recall is, I run to the distraction, then you call me again. So all of you can practice it if you've got enough people in the household. You're calling the dog from the front room to the kitchen, and he has to run past somebody who's got a biscuit. If he stops the person with the biscuit, your inclination is to call him again. That is not the right idea. That is seriously a bad idea, because you told the dog then that the first recall didn't matter. Not that he's thinking it through that way. Remember, you're actually just locking down a memory. If you're calling your dog from the front room to the kitchen and there's somebody with a biscuit in the way and the dog stops, you need to go to the dog, show him you've got a much, 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 much better biscuit, and draw him back, probably by his nostrils, back to where he was originally called from, okay? So do be careful about messing your recalls up. If you do have to call twice in emergency, yes, but in a training aspect, never. Now, you've said she's good for 2 to 3 times. Your last memory is the strongest. I would do 1 really good recall, and then I wouldn't do another for a bit. So maybe she's running off then because she doesn't want to do any more recalls. Maybe. What are you recalling her back for? If she's running off to go look for scent, then I'd make sure that her recall was coming to me. And then the minute she's come to me, I'll release her onto something I've hidden in the hedge. Okay? There's so much you can do. There's so much you can do. And of course, what happens then is, as the gentleman says, that he started not letting off less and less, which means she's not going to practice. So I would say in that situation, some distraction training in the garden and around the house to see what you can and can't recall your dog off. Remember, if you get 1 good one, you can stop and then start again a few minutes later. If you do 1 good recall down the park, down the field, don't do another one for a bit, do something else. And also, it's called a pre-mac. Reward her for what she wants to do. So if she comes to you, she can go and sniff and find something for you. Even if it's food, you could even throw some food to one side before you call her back. Once you've called her back, show that you've got some lovely food hidden in the hedge for her to go look for. It's only sound memory movement, remember, sound memory movement. Some of you know in class, I always say the same thing. You want to make it equivalent to the fact that your mobile phone's gone and the number that comes up on your phone is something you really want to answer really quick because you think it'd be a really good idea. That's what your dogs need to feel when they hear the recall sound, that it would be a fantastic idea to get back to their owner as soon as possible. 7-month-old spaniel, nightmare on lead, pulls and pulls so much I hate taking her out. When we get to the field, she's great, running it after the ball and bringing it back, no problem, except for the dark. When she will walk with me and sniff around like a normal dog, and it's great. So, dogs repeat successful behavior. You need to go right back to basics with your 7-month-old spaniel bitch. I would go back to coffee table work. So again, always, everybody, always give yourself a litmus paper test, whether it's a puppy, a teenager, or an adult. So for me, a litmus paper test with this dog would be, will she walk nicely with me on a lead around the house? If the answer is yes, then I will ask, will she walk around nicely with me around the house with the front door open? Will she walk nicely around with me around the house? Me rewarding her, of course. Will she walk nicely around the house with me if I have the front door open and I take 2 strides out and come back in? You generally need to help yourselves by finding where you haven't got your training, okay? And then figuring out why you haven't got a training. Always a good way to find out where you've lost your training is, again, with that dog and any dog, I would see if she would eat a piece of sausage in the house. I would see if she'd eat a piece of sausage in exactly the same way with the front door open. I would see if she would eat a piece of sausage in exactly the same way on the front drive. Always use your food as a red, amber, green for how your dog is in terms of its emotional state. So I think you need to go away and do that and then almost report back and tell me where you lose it. Because where you lose it is where the dog is distracted and where the dog is starting to go over the threshold and can't start to relate to you, isn't it? I'm going down the list, so maybe you'll tell me where you lose it. Now, obviously, when she's coming back in the dark, dogs are so contextual. Maybe it's because she's going back. Maybe it's because she is dark. Maybe because it is dark. Maybe it's because she can't see anything. Maybe she's too over-aroused by what she sees. Could be anything there. Maybe also, if she's good about coming back in the dark, getting some commands, and you say she sniffs around like a normal dog. If she's good in the dark, I would do some heel work practice when she's on the way back in the dark, which is not sniffing, which is actually walking nicely beside me. Oh, these young dogs. My border collie's 8 months now. He started barking at strangers like he doesn't like them, nervous. I'm worrying about friends and family come to the house. I don't want him to be nervous and develop behaviors around visitors. There's another question there, but that's just what we've just explained, isn't it? 8 months old. Fear situation behavior. Yeah, given dogs are often even more panicky in the house because they can't leave. The thing they're fearful of walks into the house. You can imagine being scared of snakes. Most of you, if you were scared of snakes or rats or whatever out and about, if you saw one, you would run away and move away, wouldn't you? But what do you do if one comes in the house? We might try and escape, but dogs haven't got access to the door handles or the doors, so they get into right panic. Yeah, we can talk about them more depth, but hopefully with the webinar I've just given you, you'll be better off to handle it. Hopefully it's just a stage, but you don't want your dog to learn that the way to survive around people is to be aggressive. So you want to not give it the chance to actually practice that at all. Secondly, should toys be available all the time or during specific times? Charlie's very clingy at the moment and constantly wanting to play, not settling well. Oh, he sounds like a proper teenager, doesn't he? Toys available all the time, yes, but not your special toys. Evie's got about 2 very special, 2 or 3. They're hidden away. The rest of the time, she is quite good about self-entertaining. Sometimes I'll play with her, sometimes I won't. Sometimes Francis will, sometimes Francis won't. And then the special toys, the ones which are really, you remember I said about interactive play, the really good ones are not available because that's my resource. That's, the very, very best toy, the very best game is with Mum or Franny. Charlie's clingy at the moment and constantly wanting to play, not settling well. So if Charlie's clingy and wanting to play, yeah, he's not settling well. Checking nutrition. Check he's not getting over-aroused by things he's doing during the day. If your dog's stressed on a walk because he's been going through a fearful stage, he's going to carry that emotion through to the next walk, whether because he's still full of drugs or whether because he's full of memories. Clingy might be that he wants to distract himself because playing is distracting himself as well. Definitely nutrition, definitely make sure he's not over-aroused. Make sure he's going for decompression walks, nice long sniffy walks. Don't force him into anything that worries about him. All of you check your home environments. Make sure he's getting enough sleep. And then I might use a little compulsion to teach him to settle. We're not very good about using tethering or compulsion to teach our dogs to settle. Remember, the more choices you've got your dog, the more problems you might have. When you're out walking your dogs, if you're not careful, this isn't me, because I'm a dog trainer. If you're not careful out walking your dogs, some of you give your dogs 360 different choices. So if you think about a circle around you being 360 degrees, if you're not careful, your dog can decide to go at 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 10 degrees, 19 degrees. It's too much choice. I give my dogs one choice walking with me, and that's when I'm in a certain walking mood, and that's walking beside me. And not having a lot of choices is quite good for teenagers. Not that you're going to look like a bully, but sometimes too much choice just stresses them out. You have to report back. Who was that? You have to report back, Emily. You may remember Tiggy. She had one visit. Recall good, but interesting about the breed function issue. She occasionally on walks and in the garden, she will turn to be me and bark and even grab an arm and try to spin me off in balance. No, I'm not trying to develop this. This gets close. Dogs that repeat successful behaviors. Be careful about ignoring your teenagers. You might see a lot of advice about ignoring teenagers. I suggest you ignore teenagers at your peril if they are really aroused. Leaving a dog underneath a table with a tissue is one thing, but maybe leaving a dog under a tissue table who has previously learned that he wants loads of attention to it will create a lot of frustration. But dogs don't repeat successful behaviors. Occasionally walks. I would be ready on that walk and in the garden, if she turns to me and barks, if she turned to me and you recognized it was going to happen, I would just be chucking a toy or some food at her. Whenever you've got a behavioral chain you don't like, a neural pathway you don't like, try and crack it. Try and break it. She's trying to tell you something. But again, this is a good one for you all. Originally, this collie, spaniel, whatever she is, would have been trying to tell her owner something. And actually the reason that she was telling her owner about something might just have gone. This could be an emotional memory, a habit. So be careful. It's quite hard to know between the two. But I'd be ready at all costs to actually decay that memory. Unless it's something she's fearful of. She loves people and dogs and has a great sense of humor. Is that her being overly playful? Yes, there is some research which say that dogs can play jokes. And they do remember if you're happy about something. So if as a puppy your dog does something and you laugh, you might not want it as a 40-kilogram dog. My 40-kilogram shepherds crawl all over me and my daughter, and they are heavy and they are pointy, and we just laugh. I mean, we laugh hysterically actually, even when they've got their elbows in the wrong place, because we taught them as puppies that they climb over their peers. Puppies sleep on their mums, they hang off their mums and dads, they just hang over them. And dogs do recognize. So be careful what you laugh at with your puppy, because it might become a habit in your older dog. But that one, any behavioral chain you don't like, be ready to decay it. Digger barks at any slight noise is only reflection, everything. Yeah, well, it's a couple of things. We're talking about training, but Digger barks, this is the dachshund. It sounds like he's already too, if this is a happy dog, and this is behaviors we don't want, Digger sounds like he's already halfway. Our job is, okay, to recognize my dog is sort of like this, but most dogs aren't. So nutrition, handling, teenager, fulfillment, can enrichment. You know, it sounds like he's going around a little bit of a bear of a bad head. A dog with a bad gut, and I don't mean his poos are wrong. He's just got this sort of microbiome which isn't great, or he's got a sort of a feeling he doesn't feel right. You have to tell me, Joe, if you think Digger's happy most of the time. 7-month-old Staffy, good at walking on lead. But the moment children come on the walk, he is very hyperactive and pulls me all the time. I need help so we can enjoy family walks. Okay, so yeah, not unusual. I get lots of particularly usually the mothers who take the dogs out for a walk by themselves, and the dogs are perfect, take the children out and they're not. So obviously dogs like packs to stay together, and children don't often hang around quite close. That can upset the dog. The dogs pick up on the children's energy. That doesn't help. Then the dogs pick up on the fact that the parents are getting stressed because the dogs are getting stressed because the children are running around. That doesn't help. Again, I might make sure I could do the same as before, that I can walk around the house with the children there doing stuff. It does take a lot for dogs to learn that when they're on lead with the children around, that they actually do need to actually walk nicely. Difficult. If you can go out with one child, or you can practice on your front drive, maybe your children, or can you walk your dog around when the children are in the garden? All about creating memories. Have a little go at seeing, again, the litmus paper test. Have a little go seeing what you can do with the children around when they're in the house or in the garden. Or make sure you pile everybody into a car and end up with your dog on the long line maybe. Make sure he's got more freedom. Do the children want to interact with the dog? Can the children help out? Sometimes the dog will walk with a child, but not the adult, which is an interesting thing. That's a different subject altogether. Oh, a few people going, that's fine. 5-month-old collie who has started to bark at strangers on walks. I reached a spot where she has previously barked at a person. She'll bark again, expecting the same scenario. That's called an emotional memory. So that's you and me driving down the road. We have a car accident at a certain roundabout. Maybe it was slippy, maybe it wasn't our fault, maybe it was sunny, whatever. That roundabout is going to bring up an emotional memory, maybe forever, but maybe for quite a long time. So again, if there's any spot your dog tends to react to, you want to try and train. So I try and work around that spot. I would move around it. I would feed. I would play. I would see where the dog starts to look to be aroused. She does stop and interact. I might ask a friend to be helping me out as a stooge person. If there isn't anyone there, we stop and interact in the area. Then next time she's much better past the area. Yep, there you go. You're decaying the memory. You're changing the memories. What is the best option for stopping the behavior in the first place? Well, that's back to what we were saying. Teach dogs when they're scared of people, you're not going to drag them out of the depth. Remember, your dogs are barking or getting upset because they think they're going to end up next to the person. I tend to these days say, think of your people and dogs as whirlpools. No, thank you. My props, Kath. Think of people as whirlpools. Your dogs will get dragged into them because that's what whirlpool does. It drags people, drags dogs into situations, but they're just going to go down. They're just going to drown. They're just going to drown. So teach your dogs to go around whirlpools. Yeah, and your lanes is difficult. Again, give yourself a chance. If you've got a certain problem about meeting people on the lanes, get off the lanes. And I go up the race course, or we go to Travonin. You can certainly do Irvig or Lewin Water. Go somewhere there's a big space and see dogs and ebb around them. See people and ebb around them. Is that my last question? What time is it? Oh, yeah, we said an hour and a half. Oh, I think it is.